Tweets ignite society. Statuses begin battles. Everyone has an opinion. No one wants to surrender. We bring the cold hard facts. We are calling for a ceasefire.
There are so many debates about what is and is not in the Bible, as well as interpretations of different scriptures. Let's take a ceasefire moment to deepen understanding and seek knowledge. Thank you for joining us in this ceasefire moment. Today, we're going to talk about the Israelites, the common people, Tabernacle and Eden. On this journey, we're going to do some reframing of ideas by changing the traditional words we use. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with the words we are using. However, changing can help us reframe what we think of when we hear them. We're going to begin with Jews. During the time of the Exodus, it was the Israelites that we're talking about. At that time, all the tribes of Jacob and Israel were together along with sojourners and foreigners who were traveling with them. So it wasn't Jews that were taken out of Egypt. It was the Israelites. Nations. Nations means a people group. Today, we say nations and we think countries. However, in biblical times, this meant a group of like-minded people. Holy place. We're going to call this the set-apart place. This more clearly conveys the meaning at that time. Sometimes holy can seem unattainable. Holy of Holies. We're going to call this the most set-apart place. It is a progression from being set apart to being most set apart. Commandments. We're going to call this the witness or the testimony. This is more accurate to what God called what we have come to know as the 10 Commandments. The other instructions found in the Torah he referred to as his right rulings. We'll talk more about these later. The people we are talking about today camped on the outside of the camp. They were furthest in the camp away from the tabernacle where God dwelled. They were people grouped by family units. We will refer to them as the Israelites. However, there were non-Israelites among them. God called them the common people. If we were looking at this camp today, we would most likely think of everyone in this picture as people who would refer to themselves as Christians, Catholics, Protestants, etc. They would somehow associate themselves with the faith who recognizes Jesus as the Messiah, and they may or may not actually be attending church. Everyone in this camp has chosen to follow God and obey the testament he presented to them at Mount Sinai. Remember, his testimony or witness is what we have come to call the 10 Commandments. The testimony was read out loud to everyone in the camp, and they accepted them. However, right after they accepted the testimony, they immediately broke it by creating an idol. It was what they had become accustomed to after so many years of living in Egypt. Let's take another look at the overlay of Eden and the tabernacle. East of Eden is where Cain was expelled to. This is Earth. Earth does not mean the big blue ball floating into space. Earth is where man is. Earth is where man's law reigns. We're going to talk about the access to the outer courts today. The outer courts is equal to east of Eden. Many people live in these outer courts, confessing with their mouth but not with their lives. They continue to go back and forth between the outside and the outer courts. These people had access to the outer courts, but the only way they could enter is by coming to the gate with an offering. Let's talk about Jesus and access to the tabernacle. Jesus has identified himself as our Passover lamb. If you recall, in the Exodus story, the lamb's blood was put on the threshold of the homes so that the death would pass over them and not kill the firstborn in their home. There were no requirements on anyone in the household outside of participating in sacrificing the lamb. If they were in a house with blood on the threshold, they were passed over. Those people were then led out of bondage and set free. This is exactly what Jesus did. He provided his blood as a sacrificial lamb. This is made available to anyone and everyone. Those who want to enter the kingdom of God come with their offering, Jesus, and they have access to the kingdom. There's no access to the kingdom without an offering. The problem is the people who only access the outer courts keep coming back because, again, they confess with their mouth but do not change their old ways. They agree to follow God's law and then turn right around and create an idol. In a previous video, I've referred to these people as the My Way people. They participate in the offering, the Passover lamb. They put the blood over their threshold. They're then let out of bondage and set free, only to long for their bondage and return to that bondage. If you've not read Exodus, I encourage you to do so. There is very little you will see in the movies and animations created to try and tell the story. At this time, Jesus has not fulfilled the Passover lamb requirements, but God had other requirements for the Israelites to be able to enter the outer courts. Let's do a quick flashback to Cain for a moment. And it came to be in the course of times that Cain brought an offering of the fruits of the ground to Yahweh, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And Yahweh looked to Abel and his offering. There isn't anything wrong with the fruit offering, but Cain brought an offering. Abel brought of the firstborn. It doesn't say Cain brought his first fruits. We know from later scriptures that God requires the first and the unblemished, the best. And Yahweh said to Cain, "Is it not if you do good, you are to be accepted? And if you do not do good, towards the door is a sin offering." Cain did what was right in his own eyes. Take note of the sin offering referred to here. There are 5 types of offering, but only 2 were required. The other 3 were voluntary. The first of the 2 required was the guilt offering. The guilt offering could be brought for either an unintentional or an intentional sin against man. Think of the laws numbered 6 through 10, which is God's witness. The goal of this offering was restoration, restoring relationship with man and restoring relationship with God. When the guilt offering was brought, a restitution in full was also brought to restore what was taken or lost. The blood was sprinkled on the altar. It also included a 5th part added to give to the priests. These sins are committed in the flesh against flesh. The second was the sin offering. Remember what God said to Cain, "And if you do not do good, towards the door is a sin offering." The sin offering could only be brought for an unintentional sin. Think of the laws 1 through 5 in God's witness. The goal of this offering was atonement and purification. There were different requirements based on whether the person was a common person, which is who we're talking about today, a leader, or a priest. This offering was expensive. The lawbreaker had to bring an animal based on what they could afford, and it had to be unblemished. When this offering was brought, the sinner had to confess the sin, put their hands on the head of the sacrifice and push down, transferring his sin onto the animal, and then slaughter it. Once the animal was slaughtered, the blood was sprinkled as directed throughout the tabernacle. You'll notice on the guilt offering it was sprinkled on the altar. For the sin offering, it had to be sprinkled throughout the tabernacle. These sins are mainly committed against God in our spirit. There may be outward signs, but sometimes there are not. We no longer bring these offerings. Jesus has shed his blood once and for all. The laws haven't changed. The penalty hasn't changed. How we pay the penalty has changed. This is what is meant by Jesus when he said he didn't come to abolish the law, he came to fulfill the law. He came to fulfill the penalty requirements. When Jesus was asked which of the laws was the greatest, he said they all could be summed up by these two: love others as yourself and love God. If you are not sinning against yourself, others, and God, then you have no need to bring any guilt or sin offering. Ask yourself, is this where I want to be? Part of the common people in the outer courts outside of Eden, furthest from the dwelling place of Yahweh God, living where earth is, where man's laws prevail outside of Eden, agreeing to follow God's witness but continuing to live my old ways, continuing to unintentionally or intentionally hurt myself, others, and unintentionally hurt God, and continuing to need a guilt and sin offering, bringing a sacrifice to slaughter, Jesus, so he can bring restoration and atonement for your sin. We're only at just inside the gate. God has so much more planned for you. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining us on this ceasefire moment. We hope you learned something.